Most manipulation doesn't look like manipulation. It doesn't come with obvious control or force. It comes quietly, through emotion, through subtle pressure, through small shifts that make you question yourself without even realizing it. Someone makes you feel guilty for setting a boundary. Someone withdraws attention to make you chase. Someone uses tone, silence, or timing to influence your reaction. And if you're not aware of it, you adjust. You soften your stance. You over-explain. You second-guess your decisions. And just like that, control shifts. Not because they overpowered you, but because they access something internal. Your need for approval. Your fear of rejection. Your discomfort with conflict. That's where manipulation actually works. It doesn't control your actions directly. It controls the emotions that drive your actions. And once your emotions are influenced, your behavior follows naturally. That's why most people don't even notice it happening. They think they're choosing, but they're reacting. Now here's the shift. When someone becomes truly secure, that access point disappears. Not because they block people out, but because their emotional state is no longer dependent on external signals. They don't need constant validation to feel stable. They don't need agreement to feel confident. They don't need approval to trust their own decisions. And because of that, the usual tactics stop working. Guilt doesn't land the same. Silence doesn't create panic. Disagreement doesn't feel like a threat. Instead of reacting, they observe. Instead of adjusting immediately, they pause. Instead of internalizing everything, they filter it. That creates a barrier, not a defensive wall, but a stable core that doesn't shift easily. And when someone tries to manipulate that kind of person, something unusual happens. The pattern breaks. They expect guilt, but get clarity. They expect pressure, but get calm. They expect reaction, but get nothing. And that lack of response removes their leverage. Because manipulation depends on predictable emotional reactions. If someone knows how you'll feel, they can guide what you do. But if your emotional responses are stable and controlled, they lose that pathway completely. That's when security becomes power. Not loud power. Not aggressive control. But quiet independence. The kind that can't be easily influenced because it doesn't rely on anything external to stay grounded. To become impossible to manipulate, you have to understand what manipulators actually rely on. It's not intelligence. It's not strength. It's predictability. They look for patterns in your behavior. What makes you feel guilty? What makes you seek approval? What makes you uncomfortable enough to give in? Once they find that pattern, they don't need to control you directly. They just trigger the right emotion and let your reaction do the rest. That's why most manipulation feels subtle. It doesn't force you. It nudges you. And if your emotional responses are automatic, those nudges work every time. Now here's the shift. Secure people interrupt that pattern at the source. They don't remove emotion. They remove automatic reaction. When something feels off, they don't rush to fix it. When someone applies pressure, they don't immediately respond. When guilt is introduced, they don't accept it without question. They pause. And that pause is everything. Because it gives them space to ask a different kind of question. Is this actually mine to carry? Most people never ask that. They feel guilt and assume it's valid. They feel pressure and assume they should respond. They feel discomfort and assume they did something wrong. But secure people filter those signals. They recognize that not every emotion deserves a response. Not every expectation deserves compliance. Not every reaction from someone else requires adjustment. That filtering process creates emotional independence. And emotional independence breaks manipulation. Another important shift is how secure people handle boundaries. Most people set boundaries with hesitation. They soften them. They explain them excessively. They try to make sure the other person is comfortable with them. And that opens the door for manipulation, because now the boundary is negotiable. But secure people don't treat boundaries like requests. They treat them like decisions. They don't over-explain. They don't seek agreement. They state them calmly and move forward. And if someone reacts negatively, they don't rush to fix it. They allow the reaction to exist without absorbing it. That alone changes everything. Because manipulation often relies on emotional reactions to boundaries. If someone pushes back and you immediately adjust, they learn that pressure works. But if you stay steady, if you don't move, if you don't engage emotionally with their reaction, the strategy fails. And when a strategy fails repeatedly, it stops being used. That's how security protects you, not by fighting manipulation, but by making it ineffective. The final level of security is when you stop scanning for manipulation altogether, not because it doesn't exist, but because you're no longer vulnerable to it in the same way. At the beginning, you're aware. You analyze behavior. You question intentions. You try to spot patterns. But over time, something shifts. You stop focusing on what others are doing, and you start trusting how you respond. That's a completely different level, because now, even if someone attempts to manipulate you, it doesn't land. Not because you caught it intellectually, but because your internal state doesn't give it anything to attach to. There's no urgency to fix things. No fear of losing approval. No pressure to explain yourself. And without those internal hooks, manipulation has nothing to pull on. At this stage, your behavior becomes very simple. You don't overcommit to keep people happy. You don't say yes when you mean no. You don't stay in conversations that feel one-sided or draining. You don't chase clarity from people who create confusion. Instead, you respond based on alignment. If something feels right, you engage. If it doesn't, you step back. No drama. No overthinking. Just clarity. And that clarity creates consistency. People start to notice that your behavior doesn't change under pressure. You don't bend when someone pushes. You don't soften when someone withdraws. You don't overextend when someone expects more than you're willing to give. You stay the same. And that consistency sends a message. You cannot be moved through emotion. You cannot be rushed into decisions. You cannot be guided through subtle pressure. That's when manipulation fully loses its power. Because manipulation depends on emotional leverage. If someone can make you feel guilty, they can influence you. If someone can make you feel insecure, they can guide your behavior. If someone can create urgency, they can rush your decisions. But when those emotional levers don't work, the entire system collapses. Now here's the deeper truth. Being secure doesn't mean you never feel anything. You still feel discomfort. You still notice tension. You still recognize when something is off. The difference is, you don't immediately act on it. You let it pass through awareness first. And in that space, you choose your response. That's what makes you difficult to manipulate. Not because you resist people, but because you don't react automatically. Over time, this changes how people interact with you. They become more direct, more respectful, more careful with how they approach you. Not because you demanded it, but because your stability requires it. And once people realize they can't easily influence you, they stop trying. Because there's nothing to grab onto. No emotional hook. No predictable reaction. Just a steady, grounded presence that doesn't move unless it chooses to. And that's when security becomes more than confidence. It becomes freedom.